My daughter looked at me in the middle of a crowded charity gala and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Mom, you're ruining my reputation." The room went silent. I stood there holding my old purse with both hands, while strangers stared at me like I was some embarrassing mistake she wanted erased. Vanessa had spent years building her perfect image, and I had spent years protecting the truth behind it. But that night, something inside me finally broke. I looked at my daughter, the child I once sacrificed everything for, and quietly asked, "If I embarrass you that much, should I tell them what you did to me?" And for the first time all evening, Vanessa looked afraid. Before I continue, I just want to say, if you've ever loved someone who slowly turned your kindness into weakness, this story may hit close to home. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy emotional family stories like this. And in the comments, tell me, what would you have done in my place? Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I truly love reading every comment. I live in a small white house on the edge of Columbus, Ohio, where the sidewalks crack every winter and the neighbors still wave when they drive by. It isn't much to look at. The porch paint is peeling in places, and the wind rattles the kitchen windows whenever storms roll through. But after everything in my life that disappeared, this little house became the one thing that still felt honest. Most mornings, I wake up before sunrise. I make coffee in the same chipped blue mug I've had for 15 years and sit beside the kitchen window while the neighborhood slowly comes alive. There's an older man across the street who walks his golden retriever every morning at exactly 6:30. There's a young mother 2 houses down who always rushes her children into the car 5 minutes too late. And then there's me. Just me. At 67 years old, silence becomes something different. When you're young, silence feels peaceful. When you're older, it sometimes feels like proof that everyone eventually leaves. My husband, Richard Warren, passed away 11 years ago from a heart attack. One moment he was sitting in his recliner complaining about baseball, and the next moment the paramedics were carrying him out our front door while I stood barefoot on the lawn in shock. After Richard died, people kept telling me I was strong. What they really meant was that I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. Vanessa was still trying to build her career back then. She was ambitious, even as a little girl, always chasing perfection, always terrified of being ordinary. I remember once, when she was 13, she cried for 2 hours because she got second place in a school debate competition. Second place. I held her in my arms that night while she sobbed into my sweater and said, "Baby, nobody is perfect." But even then, she whispered something I never forgot. "I have to be." At the time, I thought it was determination. Now I think it was fear. After Richard died, I worked longer hours than my body wanted to handle. I had already retired from teaching elementary school, but retirement doesn't mean much when bills keep arriving. So I worked at the church office during the mornings and stocked shelves at a grocery store 3 nights a week. I never told Vanessa how exhausted I was. I never told her about the nights my knees hurt so badly I cried quietly in the bathtub because I didn't want her to feel guilty. I never told her there were days I skipped lunch to help pay her rent when she moved to Chicago for her first public relations job. Because mothers don't usually keep score. At least good mothers don't. Vanessa's life looked beautiful now. Beautiful house, beautiful husband, beautiful clothes, beautiful photographs online where everyone smiled too hard. Every few weeks, I'd see her face in local magazines, standing beside politicians or charity organizers, always polished and elegant, always described as influential or inspiring. Sometimes, I'd stare at those pictures longer than I should. Not because I was proud, because I was searching for the little girl I used to know. Lately, even our phone calls felt scripted. "Hi, Mom. I only have a minute. Mom, you should really update your wardrobe a little." Mom, when you meet my colleagues, maybe don't bring up personal family stories. Mom, people notice things. People notice things? That sentence stayed with me after every conversation. The truth was, Vanessa had become obsessed with appearances somewhere along the way. Every dinner plate had to look perfect. Every photo had to be filtered. Every friendship had to be useful. Even grief became performative for her. Last Thanksgiving, she posted an old picture of Richard online with a caption about family values and honoring the people who shaped us. She forgot it was the anniversary of the day she missed his final birthday dinner because she thought a networking event was more important. I never mentioned it. I rarely mentioned anything anymore. That Tuesday morning, 4 days before the gala, I was kneeling in my garden trimming dead flowers when my phone rang. Vanessa. I wiped dirt from my hands before answering. Hi, sweetheart. Her voice sounded distracted immediately. Mom, I need to ask you something. I smiled automatically anyway. Of course. There's a charity gala this Saturday. Daniel and I are hosting one of the donor tables. I waited. You should come? For a moment, my chest warmed. Vanessa almost never invited me anywhere important anymore. Oh, I said softly. I'd love that. Good. She paused. But there are a few things. And there it was. The conditions. You'll need something appropriate to wear, she said carefully. Nothing too outdated. I looked down at my gardening clothes and forced a laugh. I think I can manage that. And Mom? Her tone sharpened slightly. A lot of influential people will be there. Please don't overshare personal stories. Personal stories. That was her new phrase for the truth. I understand, I said quietly. And maybe let me handle introductions, okay? I closed my eyes for a second. Handle introductions. As if I were a difficult child. Still, I said, all right. After we hung up, I stayed kneeling in the dirt for a long time. I told myself she was stressed. I told myself public events made her anxious. I told myself successful people lived under pressure I didn't understand. But deep down, another feeling had started growing inside me lately. Something painful. Something I had spent years trying not to admit. Vanessa wasn't embarrassed by my clothes, or my age, or my stories. She was embarrassed by me. That evening, I opened my closet and searched for something to wear to the gala. Most of my dresses were old, simple, practical. I finally found a navy blue dress I'd worn to church on Easter 2 years ago. I held it against myself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked tired. Gray hair, soft wrinkles, sad eyes. For one terrible moment, I heard Vanessa's voice in my head. People notice things. I almost decided not to go. But then I remembered how excited Vanessa sounded when she talked about this gala months ago. How important it was for her career. How badly she wanted approval from people with money and influence. And despite everything, I still wanted my daughter to look out into a crowded room and know her mother showed up for her. Even now. Especially now. I just didn't realize yet that by the end of that week my daughter would wish I had stayed home. The gala was scheduled for Saturday night at the Grand Meridian Hotel in downtown Columbus, one of those places filled with polished marble floors and people who smiled without ever showing real emotion. Vanessa called me 3 times before the event. The first call was about my dress. The second was about my hair. The third was about what stories I should avoid telling. By the time Saturday arrived, I felt less like a mother attending her daughter's event and more like an employee being prepared for a public appearance. You're not upset, are you? Vanessa asked during our final call that afternoon. I stood in my bedroom fastening a pair of pearl earrings Richard had bought me for our 30th anniversary. No, I lied. Good. I just need tonight to go smoothly. Smoothly. That word again. Everything in Vanessa's life had become about appearances running smoothly. I understand, I said quietly. I'll send Daniel to pick you up around 6:30. After the call ended, I stared at myself in the mirror. The navy blue dress still fit, though loosely now. Age changes the body in strange ways. You slowly disappear from places you once filled completely. I brushed my gray hair back carefully and applied lipstick with slightly trembling hands. For a moment, I remembered getting Vanessa ready for her junior prom. She had stood in this exact bedroom crying because she thought another girl looked prettier than she did. I spent an hour curling her hair while telling her she was beautiful. Back then, she still let me comfort her. Back then, she still needed me in ways that felt honest. At exactly 6:30, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. Daniel stepped out wearing a tailored charcoal suit and his usual polite expression. Daniel Brooks was the kind of man people trusted immediately. Calm voice, perfect posture, expensive watch. He never raised his voice, never appeared emotional, never seemed out of control. But over the years, I had learned something important about polished people. Sometimes the calmest ones are simply the best at hiding discomfort. "Good evening, Elise," he said warmly as he opened the passenger door for me. "You look lovely. Thank you." As we drove downtown, soft jazz played through the speakers. Daniel kept both hands on the steering wheel while the city lights reflected across the windshield. "How's Vanessa doing?" I asked. He smiled faintly, stressed. "She always pushes herself too hard." That's true. Something in his tone felt careful, measured. After a long silence, he added, "Tonight means a lot to her." I looked out the window. I know. She just wants everything to be perfect. There it was again. Perfect. I wondered if either of them realized how exhausting perfection becomes for everyone standing nearby. Traffic slowed near the hotel entrance where photographers and valets crowded beneath glowing lights. Women stepped out of luxury cars wrapped in designer gowns, while men adjusted cufflinks and practiced important-looking smiles. The entire scene made my stomach tighten. Daniel noticed. "You'll be fine," he said gently. I nodded, though suddenly I wasn't sure. Inside the ballroom lobby, everything sparkled. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead like frozen waterfalls. Servers carried trays of champagne through groups of wealthy guests, laughing too loudly at each other's jokes. And standing near the center of it all was Vanessa. She wore a fitted silver gown that shimmered every time she moved beneath the lights. Her dark hair was pinned perfectly in place, and her smile looked rehearsed enough to belong on television. For one brief second, when she saw me approaching, her expression tightened. Not warmth, not happiness, assessment. She scanned my dress, my shoes, my hair. Then the smile returned instantly. "There you are," she said as she kissed my cheek lightly. "You made it." I tried not to notice how relieved she sounded that I looked acceptable. "You look beautiful," I told her honestly. "Thank you." She adjusted the bracelet on her wrist. "Okay, so tonight is very important. Some major donors are here along with members of the city council and a few reporters. I remember. And Mom?" Her eyes flickered toward my purse. "Maybe keep your bag at the table. It looks a little worn." The words hit harder than they should have. I looked down at the old brown leather purse Richard had given me years ago. Suddenly, I became painfully aware of every sign of age on me. The wrinkles on my hands, the inexpensive shoes, the softness around my waist. Daniel cleared his throat quietly, sensing tension. "Vanessa?" he murmured. What she whispered back quickly. "I'm just trying to help." Help. That word hurt too. Vanessa immediately smiled again and looped her arm through mine for appearances. "Come on," she said brightly. "Let me introduce you to people." but the introductions felt strange from the very beginning. "This is my mother, Elise," Vanessa would say quickly before smoothly redirecting attention back to herself. She was a teacher. Used to be. Past tense. As if my life had already ended. At one point, a woman wearing a diamond necklace shook my hand politely and asked, "So what do you do now?" Before I could answer, Vanessa laughed softly. "Oh, Mom mostly keeps busy gardening and attending church events." Mostly. As though my life could be summarized in one dismissive sentence. I smiled anyway, because mothers learn how to swallow hurt without choking on it. As the evening continued, I noticed something unsettling. Vanessa watched me constantly, not lovingly, nervously. Every time I spoke too long to someone, her eyes drifted toward me. Every time I laughed too loudly, her shoulders tightened slightly. It was the look people give lit candles near expensive curtains. Fear disguised as politeness. During dinner, I sat beside two older donors discussing charity work in local schools. When they learned I had been a teacher for nearly 40 years, they became genuinely interested. One man asked, "What inspired you to teach?" Before I could answer fully, Vanessa interrupted from across the table. "My mom has always been very emotional about helping people." Emotional. Another careful word. Not dedicated, not compassionate. Emotional. I noticed the donors exchange small glances. Vanessa kept smiling while subtly reshaping me into someone softer, less credible, less important. By dessert, my chest ached with exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. The kind that comes from realizing someone has spent years editing you into a version easier to manage. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway outside the ballroom. The quiet there felt like oxygen. I stood beside a tall window overlooking the city lights and pressed one hand against my chest. For the first time that evening, I allowed myself to admit something painful. Vanessa wasn't worried I would embarrass her accidentally. She had already decided I was embarrassing simply by existing. "You look like you could use some air too." I turned at the sound of the voice. A woman around Vanessa's age stood near the hallway entrance holding a champagne glass. Blonde hair, sharp eyes, elegant black dress. It took me a moment to recognize her. "Megan?" I asked softly. Megan Foster smiled sadly. "It's been a long time, Elise." And something about the expression on her face told me immediately that this conversation was about to change everything. "Megan," I repeated softly, still trying to place the woman standing in front of me. The last time I had seen Megan Foster was nearly 15 years earlier, back when she and Vanessa were inseparable. They used to spend weekends together drinking cheap wine in my kitchen while planning glamorous futures neither of them could afford yet. Back then, Megan laughed easily. Tonight she looked tense, careful, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "You look good, Elise," she said gently. I smiled faintly. "That's kind of you." The ballroom music echoed softly from behind the closed doors, while people laughed somewhere down the hallway. But standing there with Megan, I suddenly felt strangely exposed, as though something invisible had already begun unraveling around me. "I didn't know you and Vanessa were still close," I admitted. Megan let out a short breath that almost sounded bitter. "We're not." That answer surprised me. Vanessa rarely let go of relationships unless they stopped benefiting her somehow. Megan leaned beside me near the window and stared down at the city lights. "I almost didn't come tonight," she said quietly. "Why?" Her eyes flicked toward the ballroom doors. "Because I knew she'd be here. She, not Vanessa," as if saying her name required effort. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Megan finally turned toward me fully. "Elise, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Does Vanessa know what people think happened back then?" My stomach tightened immediately. I tried to keep my face calm. I'm not sure what you mean. Megan gave me a sad look. She told everyone you were unstable. The word hit me harder than I expected. Unstable. Not difficult, not emotional. Unstable. She said your husband's death caused some kind of breakdown. Megan continued carefully. That you created financial problems for the family. That she spent years trying to clean up the damage. I stared at her. For a moment, I genuinely couldn't breathe. The hallway suddenly felt too warm. My voice cracked slightly. I never caused financial problems. I know. But people believe that Megan hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. I looked away quickly before tears could fully form. All this time, I thought Vanessa was merely embarrassed by me. I hadn't realized she had been rewriting me, piece by piece, year by year, until even strangers saw me through her version of the story. She's been telling that story for a long time, Megan said softly, especially after she started working in PR. I shook my head slowly, but why Megan looked at me with an expression that felt almost guilty? Because it made her look stronger. The words landed like stones in my chest. Strong women survive difficult mothers. Successful women overcome broken homes. Inspirational women rise above pain. I suddenly understood exactly what Vanessa had done. She had turned herself into the heroine of a tragedy that never existed. And she had cast me as the villain. I wrapped my arms around myself tightly. That's not true, I whispered. I know it isn't. Then why didn't anyone ask me? Megan's expression darkened slightly. Because Vanessa is very convincing. That part at least was true. Even as a child, Vanessa could make lies sound polished enough to resemble truth. I remembered the time she broke a neighbor's window with a baseball at age 12 and somehow convinced everyone another child had done it. She cried so beautifully while denying it that even I doubted myself for a moment. Richard used to joke about it. She could sell sunshine during a thunderstorm, he'd laugh. At the time, it seemed harmless. Now I wondered if the warning signs had always been there. Megan took a sip of champagne before lowering her voice further. Elise, there's something else you should know. My chest tightened again. What is it? She's scared. I frowned, scared of what Megan looked directly into my eyes, that someone will finally tell the real story. Silence settled heavily between us. I could hear my heartbeat. Slow, painful, steady. I swallowed hard. What exactly has Vanessa told people? Megan hesitated again. Then carefully, almost reluctantly, she answered. She says she had to financially rescue you after your husband died. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because it was so painfully opposite from reality that my mind didn't know what else to do. The sound startled even me. She said that I whispered. Megan nodded slowly. She tells people she spent years protecting you. Protecting me. My vision blurred slightly. I thought about the nights I worked until my feet swelled. The checks I mailed Vanessa when she couldn't afford rent. The credit cards I maxed out to help her survive unpaid internships in Chicago. The meals I skipped. The clothes I never bought. The retirement savings that disappeared little by little into her future. And somehow, in Vanessa's version of reality, she had become the savior. You know what the worst part is? Megan asked quietly. I looked at her. She almost believes it herself now. That sentence cut deeper than everything else. Because maybe that was true. Maybe Vanessa had told the story so many times that she no longer remembered where the lie ended. Maybe people can reshape memory if success rewards them enough for doing it. The ballroom doors opened suddenly, and laughter spilled into the hallway. Vanessa stepped out with two elegantly dressed women beside her. She stopped immediately when she saw Megan and me standing together. For one brief second, genuine panic flashed across her face. Not annoyance, not irritation. Fear. Then the expression vanished beneath another polished smile. "There you are," she said brightly while approaching us. "Mom, people are asking where you went." Her eyes shifted toward Megan. And Megan. "Wow. I didn't realize you were coming tonight." Megan smiled politely, though the tension between them felt sharp enough to cut glass. It was a last-minute decision. Vanessa folded her arms lightly. "How nice. I suddenly noticed something strange." Vanessa wasn't worried about me talking to random guests. She was worried about me talking to Megan specifically. "Why, Mom?" Vanessa continued smoothly. "Senator Klein and his wife are at our table now. I'd love for you to meet them." The way she said it sounded less like an invitation and more like damage control. "I'll come in a minute," I replied quietly. Vanessa's smile tightened slightly. "All right." She glanced once more at Megan before returning to the ballroom. The moment she disappeared, Megan exhaled heavily. "She's nervous," she muttered. "About me?" "Yes." I stared toward the ballroom doors. "Why now?" Megan looked down into her champagne glass. "Because there are people in that room tonight who remember what really happened." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" But before Megan could answer, another voice interrupted behind us. "Elise Warren." I turned slowly. A tall woman in an elegant emerald dress stood near the hallway entrance. Confident posture, silver earrings, sharp, intelligent eyes. It took me a second to recognize her. Then my stomach dropped. Claire Monroe, the former director of the community foundation where Vanessa had worked years ago. The woman connected to the secret I had spent over a decade burying. Claire smiled carefully. "It's been a very long time," she said. And suddenly, for the first time in years, I realized the past was no longer staying buried quietly behind us. It was walking straight toward us. The moment I saw Claire Monroe standing in front of me, every sound in the hallway seemed to disappear. For years, I had trained myself not to think about her, not to think about the foundation, not to think about that terrible winter when Vanessa called me crying so hard I could barely understand her words. But memories have strange timing. Sometimes they stay buried quietly for years until one familiar face pulls them back into the light all at once. Claire approached slowly, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. "Elise," she said again, gentler this time. "You look well." It was a polite lie. I smiled weakly anyway. "It's been a long time." "Yes, it has." Beside me, Megan suddenly looked uncomfortable. "I should probably get back inside," she murmured carefully. Claire nodded once. "Good to see you again, Megan." The moment Megan disappeared into the ballroom, I felt exposed. Alone. Claire studied my face for a few seconds before speaking quietly. "I wasn't sure Vanessa ever told you I'd be here tonight." "She didn't." Claire gave a faint sigh that seemed to confirm something silently. "That doesn't surprise me." I looked down at my trembling hands. For years, I had prayed the past would stay in the past. Not because I feared being exposed myself, but because I knew what exposure would do to Vanessa. Even now, after everything Megan told me, part of me still wanted to protect my daughter. That's the terrible thing about motherhood. Love doesn't disappear just because someone hurts you. Sometimes it survives longer than dignity does. Claire motioned toward a quieter seating area near the hallway windows. "Would you sit with me for a moment?" I hesitated, then nodded. The chairs were small velvet armchairs placed beside a decorative fireplace. From there, we could still hear distant music and laughter drifting from the ballroom. The entire evening suddenly felt unreal, like two different worlds existing side by side. Inside the ballroom, Vanessa was smiling for donors and photographers. Outside the ballroom, the truth was slowly waking up. Claire folded her hands neatly in her lap. "I've thought about you often over the years," she said. I looked at her carefully. Why her expression softened, with something that almost resembled guilt. "Because what you did for your daughter?" She paused. "Most people wouldn't have done it." My chest tightened immediately. I lowered my voice. "Please don't. Elise. She has a life now." Claire stared at me for a long moment. "And what about your life?" I didn't answer, because I honestly didn't know anymore. For years I convinced myself sacrifice was noble, necessary, loving. But tonight, hearing what Vanessa had turned me into in public, something inside me had begun questioning everything. Claire leaned back slightly. "You know," she said quietly, "when Vanessa first came to the foundation, everyone adored her." I closed my eyes briefly. Of course they did. Vanessa had always known exactly how to make people feel special. She was bright, Claire continued. Ambitious, confident. She connected with donors beautifully. Honestly, I thought she'd eventually run a nonprofit herself. I swallowed hard. But then the financial discrepancies started appearing. There it was. The sentence I had spent over a decade trying to outrun. Even now, hearing it aloud made my stomach twist painfully. Claire's voice remained calm and measured. At first, we assumed it was a bookkeeping error. Small amounts missing from different community accounts. Nothing dramatic individually. I stared at the fire flickering inside the decorative fireplace. But eventually, Claire continued softly. The numbers stopped making sense. My fingers tightened together. I remembered that night perfectly. Vanessa showing up at my front door after midnight. Mascara streaked beneath her eyes. Hands shaking. "Mom, please," she cried. "Please, help me." At the time, she was only 26 years old, still young enough for panic to make her look like a child again. I had wrapped her in my arms immediately. What happened? And then she told me. Not everything. Not the full truth. Just enough. Enough for me to understand her career would be destroyed if the foundation pressed charges. Enough for me to understand she was terrified. Enough for me to become willing to destroy myself to save her. Claire interrupted my thoughts gently. "You remember the amount, don't you?" I nodded slowly. $38,000, not millions, not enough to become national news, but enough to ruin a young woman's future forever. "I still don't fully know why she did it," Claire admitted quietly. "Pressure maybe, image, debt, fear of failure." I knew the answer already. Vanessa hated appearing unsuccessful more than she hated dishonesty. Failure terrified her. Even small failures, especially public ones. "She called me that night," I whispered. Claire nodded once. "Yes, I know. She said it was temporary. She said she only moved the money around because she thought she could replace it before anyone noticed." Claire's silence confirmed what we both knew. That explanation had never entirely added up. But back then, I didn't want explanations. I wanted to save my daughter. "I sold the house," I said softly. The words still hurt after all these years. Richard and I had owned a small rental property on the edge of town. It wasn't worth much, but it was supposed to become part of our retirement security someday. Instead, I sold it quietly within 3 weeks. Every dollar went toward repaying the missing funds. No police, no court case, no public scandal. And in exchange, Claire agreed to keep Vanessa's name out of official records. Claire looked down sadly. You begged me not to ruin her life. Tears burned my eyes immediately. I was her mother, and you took responsibility publicly. I nodded once. That had been Vanessa's idea originally. A temporary solution, she called it. If people believed an older grieving widow made financial mistakes while handling paperwork for her daughter, the story would disappear quickly. And it had, mostly, at least publicly. Privately, whispers still survived. I stared at the floor. I thought she'd eventually tell the truth. Claire looked at me carefully. Did she ever even apologize? The question broke something inside me because the answer was complicated. Vanessa had apologized once. A long time ago. I remembered the handwritten letter she gave me after the crisis ended. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you. At the time, I believed her completely. But people rarely become more honest when lies start rewarding them. She used to cry about it, I whispered. Claire's expression hardened slightly. I don't think she cries about it anymore. That sentence stayed between us heavily. Then Claire leaned closer. Elise? There's something you need to understand. I looked up slowly. Vanessa's interview last week reopened conversations about the past. Some people have started asking questions again. Cold fear spread through my chest. What kind of questions? Claire hesitated. The kind that eventually led back to you? I felt suddenly dizzy. For years I carried Vanessa's secret, quietly believing silence would protect us both. But now, Vanessa herself had started dragging the past back into public view through her lies. And if the truth finally surfaced now, people wouldn't just learn what Vanessa did. They would learn what I allowed. Claire lowered her voice carefully. If Vanessa keeps using you as part of her public story, eventually, someone is going to connect the dots. I closed my eyes, because deep down, I already knew something terrifying. The past wasn't coming back because of me. It was coming back because Vanessa kept feeding it. And for the first time in years, I began wondering whether protecting her had destroyed both of us instead of saving either one. I barely remember leaving the gala that night. Everything after my conversation with Claire Monroe felt blurred around the edges, like I was moving underwater, while the rest of the world continued normally above me. I remember Vanessa finding me near the ballroom entrance around 10:30. There you are, she said, forcing another polished smile. You disappeared for almost an hour. I looked at her differently now. Not like a mother looking at her child, like a woman trying to recognize a stranger wearing her daughter's face. I was talking, I answered quietly. With who? Claire Monroe. For the first time all evening, Vanessa's composure cracked completely, only for a second. But I saw it, the sudden stiffness in her shoulders, the panic in her eyes. What did she say to you? She asked too quickly. I studied her carefully. Why are you nervous? I'm not nervous. But she was. Desperately. Vanessa glanced around to make sure nobody nearby was listening before lowering her voice. Mom, Claire likes drama. You know that? I almost laughed at the irony. Drama. That was the word Vanessa used whenever truth threatened her comfort. She remembered me, I said simply. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. Well, yes, of course she did. And she remembered what happened. Vanessa's face lost color immediately. Mom, I'm tired, I interrupted softly. I'd like to go home. For a moment, I thought she might argue. Instead, she forced another smile. Fine. Daniel can drive you. No, I'll call a cab. Mom, don't be ridiculous. I said I'll call a cab. The sharpness in my voice startled both of us. Vanessa stared at me silently for several seconds. Then she nodded once. All right. I left the gala alone. The cold Ohio air hit my face the moment I stepped outside the hotel, and suddenly I could breathe again. Downtown Columbus glowed around me with traffic lights and passing cars, while laughter still spilled faintly from the hotel entrance behind me. Inside, Vanessa was probably already repairing the evening, smoothing things over, adjusting perceptions. That's what she always did. But for the first time in years, something had shifted inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter. The beginning of exhaustion. Real exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying someone else's lies for too long. When I finally arrived home, I didn't even change clothes. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, with only the stove light glowing softly across the room. And I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly enough that nobody could hear me except God. I cried for Richard. I cried for the younger version of myself who believed sacrifice automatically created gratitude. And most painfully of all, I cried because somewhere deep down, I knew Vanessa wasn't finished using me yet. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and an aching headache. Church started at 10, but I couldn't bring myself to go. Instead, I made coffee and sat silently at the kitchen table while rain tapped against the windows. Around 11:30, someone knocked at my front door. I wasn't expecting visitors. When I opened the door, my stomach tightened immediately. Arthur Bennett stood on my porch holding a leather briefcase beneath one arm. Arthur had been Richard's friend long before he became our lawyer. He was 72 now, tall and thin with silver hair and tired eyes that always seemed to carry too many secrets. "Elise," he said gently. "May I come in?" Something about his expression made fear crawl slowly into my chest. I stepped aside silently. Arthur sat carefully at my kitchen table while I poured coffee neither of us touched. For several moments, he simply looked at me. "You look exhausted," he said quietly. "I am." He nodded as though he expected that answer. "I heard about the gala." Of course he did. People like Vanessa lived in social circles where information spread quickly. I folded my arms tightly. "Then you probably also heard I embarrassed my daughter." Arthur's expression darkened slightly. "No," he said firmly. "I heard your daughter embarrassed herself." The words stunned me. Arthur rarely spoke harshly about anyone, especially Vanessa. He opened the briefcase slowly and removed a thin folder. The moment I saw it, my pulse quickened. I recognized that folder. Blue edges, old legal tabs, a decade of buried memories. "You kept it," I whispered. Arthur gave me a sad look. "Elise, I keep everything." He placed the folder carefully on the table between us. Inside were copies of documents I had spent years trying not to think about. Financial statements, signed repayment agreements, internal foundation correspondence, and beneath them all, Vanessa's handwritten confession. I stared at the papers while nausea twisted inside me. "I thought we buried this," I whispered. "We did." "Then why bring it here?" Arthur leaned forward slowly. "Because Vanessa is reopening the story herself." I closed my eyes. "She gave another interview," he continued carefully. "This one is getting attention outside Columbus." My stomach dropped. "What did she say?" Arthur hesitated. Then he removed a folded magazine from his briefcase and slid it toward me. Vanessa smiled from the cover beside the headline, "From Pain to Power." How Vanessa Brooks Overcame a Troubled Childhood. My hands trembled as I opened the article. The interview was worse than the first one. Much worse. Vanessa described growing up with financial instability caused by a grieving mother who sometimes made destructive choices. Destructive choices. I kept reading. She claimed she learned independence because she couldn't rely on adults to protect her. I felt physically sick. Arthur watched me carefully while I read in silence. Then I reached the paragraph that shattered something inside me completely. There are people in life who teach you what not to become. Sometimes survival means learning how to distance yourself from unhealthy family patterns. No names, no direct accusations, but everyone knew exactly who she meant. My vision blurred. "She used me," I whispered. Arthur's expression softened painfully. "Elise. She used my pain to build herself into some inspirational story. You don't deserve this." The tears came before I could stop them. For years I protected Vanessa because I believed shame would destroy her. Meanwhile, she had been feeding me to public judgment piece by piece to strengthen her own image. Arthur slid a tissue box gently across the table. "There's more," he said quietly. I looked up slowly. What some reporters have started asking questions about the old foundation incident. Cold fear spread instantly through my body. No, yes, how much do they know? Not enough yet? Yet. That word echoed loudly in my mind. Arthur lowered his voice. "If Vanessa keeps drawing attention to her past publicly, eventually someone is going to uncover the financial records." I stared at him in horror. She promised me this would never happen again. Arthur looked tired suddenly. "Elise, I think Vanessa stopped protecting you a long time ago." Silence filled the kitchen. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the clock above the stove ticked steadily. I looked down at Vanessa's handwritten confession sitting near my coffee cup. I recognized every line. "I'm so sorry, Mom. Please don't let them ruin my life. I swear I'll make this right." Back then, those words broke my heart. Now they only made me feel old. Arthur studied me carefully before speaking again. "If this escalates," he said quietly, "you may eventually need to protect yourself." I laughed weakly through tears. Myself? Yes. I don't even remember how. Arthur's eyes softened. "Then maybe it's time you learn." And for the first time in years, I realized something terrifying. If the truth finally came out, Vanessa wouldn't protect me. She would sacrifice me again without hesitation. 3 days after Arthur Bennett visited my house, the article went viral locally. Not nationally, not yet. But in Columbus, it was everywhere. Women at church whispered about it over coffee after Sunday service. People shared quotes online beside photographs of Vanessa smiling elegantly at charity events. Her followers flooded the comments with admiration. "So inspiring. She survived so much. What a strong woman." Each compliment felt like another small cut across my skin. Because every piece of praise came built on a lie. I tried avoiding the internet entirely, but pain has a strange way of finding older women. Sometimes it arrives through silence, sometimes through pity, and sometimes through people trying too hard to be kind. That Wednesday morning, I stopped at a small cafe near my neighborhood after a doctor's appointment. It was the kind of quiet place filled with soft music and people working on laptops. I ordered tea and sat near the window. For almost 20 minutes, everything felt normal. Then 2 women at the next table started talking. "I'm telling you, that article made me cry," one of them said softly. The daughter, "Yes, Vanessa Brooks." I froze immediately. "She's the PR woman, right?" the second woman asked. "The one with the difficult mother." Difficult mother. My chest tightened painfully. "She said her mom embarrassed her constantly growing up," the first woman continued. "Apparently the woman had emotional problems after her husband died." I stared down into my tea. "She's lucky she escaped that environment," the second woman murmured sympathetically. Escaped. Environment. Like I was some dangerous place she survived. My hands started trembling so badly I had to grip the cup with both palms. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to walk over and tell them the truth. I wanted to scream that I spent half my life protecting the daughter they were praising. But instead, I stayed quiet. Because after years of silence, speaking up suddenly feels impossible. You start wondering whether your own voice still belongs to you. I left the cafe early without finishing my drink. When I stepped outside, cold wind hit my face sharply, and I realized I could barely breathe. By the time I reached my car, tears were already falling. Not dramatic tears, just exhausted ones. The kind that arrive when humiliation becomes too heavy to carry politely anymore. That afternoon, I received 3 phone calls. The first came from a woman at church, asking if I was doing all right emotionally. The second came from an old neighbor offering sympathy in the careful tone people use around unstable individuals. The third call hurt the most. Vanessa. I almost didn't answer. But I did. "Hi, Mom," she said brightly, as though nothing had changed. I sat silently at my kitchen table, gripping the phone. "Did you read the article?" she asked. There was pride in her voice. Actual pride. "Yes," I answered quietly. "What did you think?" For several seconds, I genuinely couldn't speak. Because what could I possibly say? That she sounded convincing? That she had transformed my grief into her personal branding strategy? That wasn't the truth, I whispered finally. Silence. Then Vanessa sighed. "Mom." "No," I interrupted softly. "Why would you say those things? You're taking it too personally." Too personally. I almost laughed. She had publicly rewritten my entire life, and somehow I was overreacting. "It made me sound unstable," I said. "It wasn't about you." The cruelty of that sentence stunned me, not because it was loud, because it was sincere. Vanessa genuinely believed her public image mattered more than my dignity. "It was absolutely about me," I whispered. "You're misunderstanding the point of the article. Then explain it to me." Another sigh. The same impatient sigh she used when correcting waiters or customer service employees. Mom people connect to stories about overcoming hardship. That's how public influence works. Public influence? I closed my eyes. So I became your hardship. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. Her voice sharpened immediately. "You know what? This is why I didn't want you reading comments online." Something inside me cracked at those words. Not shattered. Cracked. Because suddenly, I understood. Vanessa wasn't ashamed of lying. She was frustrated I reacted emotionally to being lied about. I whispered, "Do you hear yourself? I hear someone who worked extremely hard to build a successful career. At my expense. That's unfair." I actually stood up from the kitchen table then because sitting still suddenly felt impossible. "Unfair?" I repeated. "Vanessa, I sold my home for you." Silence exploded across the line. For one brief moment, neither of us breathed. I had never spoken those words aloud to her before. Not directly, not with anger behind them. Her voice dropped instantly. "Mom, you begged me to save you. Don't do this." And I did. "You promised you'd never bring it up again." The sentence hit me like ice water. Not gratitude, not remorse. A reminder of my agreement. I slowly sat back down. "You're worried," I realized quietly. "No, I'm trying to protect both of us." "No," I whispered. "You're trying to protect yourself." Vanessa's tone hardened completely now. "You don't understand how quickly reputations can collapse." There it was. The truth beneath everything. Not family, not love. Reputation. Image. Control. I looked around my quiet kitchen while her expensive life echoed through the phone. "You know what hurts the most?" I asked softly. What I defended you for years. She didn't answer. I let people think badly of me because I thought someday you'd remember what I sacrificed. Still silence. Then finally, Vanessa spoke quietly. You chose to do those things. I felt something inside me go completely still. Not rage, not heartbreak. Something colder. Because suddenly I realized she had rewritten even my sacrifices into choices she no longer owed gratitude for. You're right, I said softly. She sounded relieved immediately. Mom, thank you. I just need you to trust me. But if I chose it, I interrupted calmly, then maybe I can choose differently now. Silence. Heavy, dangerous silence. What does that mean? She asked carefully. I stared out the kitchen window at the gray Ohio sky. I don't know yet, and for the first time since Vanessa was a little girl, I heard uncertainty in her voice. Mom, you wouldn't actually say anything publicly, would you? There it was. Fear. Real fear. Not concern for me, concern for herself. I closed my eyes slowly. I spent years protecting your future, I whispered. And you spent years turning me into your shame. Please don't be dramatic. Dramatic. That word finally did it. After everything, that was still how she saw me. I ended the call without another word. Then I sat alone in my kitchen, listening to the silence afterward. And for the first time in over 10 years, I opened the old wooden cabinet above the refrigerator and took down the box containing every piece of evidence I had hidden for Vanessa. The letters, the receipts, the repayment documents, the handwritten apology. I spread them slowly across my kitchen table while late afternoon sunlight filtered through the curtains. Proof. Years of proof. And staring at those papers, I realized something terrifying. The only person still protecting Vanessa was me. The second gala took place exactly 9 days after my phone call with Vanessa. This one was bigger, more important, more public. It was hosted by the Columbus Community Advancement Board, and Vanessa had spent months organizing the event. According to the newspaper, several major investors and state politicians were attending. Her face was everywhere online that week. Elegant smile, perfect makeup, inspirational quotes beneath photographs of her helping children or shaking hands with donors. Meanwhile, I spent most evenings sitting alone at my kitchen table, staring at the box of documents I still hadn't decided what to do with. Every night, I told myself the same thing: I won't expose my daughter. And every morning, another article or comment reminded me she had already exposed me. By Friday afternoon, I still hadn't decided whether I would attend the gala. Part of me wanted to disappear completely, to stay home, to let Vanessa have her perfect evening untouched. But another part of me, smaller, quieter, but growing stronger each day, felt tired of hiding, tired of shrinking myself to protect someone who no longer protected me. At 5 o'clock, my phone rang. Vanessa. I stared at the screen for nearly 30 seconds before answering. Hello. Her voice sounded unusually soft. Mom, are you still coming tonight? I looked toward the navy blue dress hanging near my closet. I haven't decided. A pause. Then carefully she said, I really think it would mean a lot if you came. I almost asked mean a lot to who to you, or to the image you're trying to maintain. Instead, I said quietly, why? Another pause. Because people will ask where you are. There it was. Not because she missed me, not because she loved me, because my absence would create questions. I closed my eyes briefly. I'll think about it. Mom. Her voice lowered slightly. Please don't make tonight difficult. The words settled heavily between us. I wanted to ask whether she even realized how cruel she sounded anymore. But exhaustion had replaced most of my anger by then. "I'll be there," I said softly. The relief in her voice was immediate. "Good. Thank you." After we hung up, I sat silently in my living room while the evening sunlight faded across the carpet. Then slowly, I stood and got ready. This time, I didn't try to look younger, didn't try to look wealthier, didn't try to become more acceptable. I wore the same navy blue dress, the same pearl earrings Richard bought me years ago, the same old brown purse Vanessa hated, because suddenly I was tired of apologizing for existing exactly as I was. The gala was held inside the Glassmore Hotel downtown, a towering building covered in lights and polished steel. When my cab arrived, photographers crowded near the entrance while guests stepped from luxury vehicles wearing gowns that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. For a moment standing outside that building, I almost turned around. I didn't belong there, not because I wasn't good enough, because the entire room operated on performance, and I was too tired to perform anymore. Inside the ballroom, golden lights reflected off crystal centerpieces, while soft piano music drifted through the crowd. The room smelled like expensive perfume and fresh flowers. And there was Vanessa, standing near the stage in a white designer gown, smiling effortlessly beside city officials and donors. She looked radiant, confident, untouchable, until she saw me. Her smile flickered for half a second when her eyes landed on my purse. Then she quickly recovered and walked toward me. "Mom," she said brightly, kissing my cheek. "You made it?" "Yes." Her eyes scanned me quickly, not lovingly, evaluating. "You wore the same dress?" I looked at her calmly. "Yes." Something tightened in her expression. "It's fine," she said quickly. "You still look nice?" Still look nice, as though she were grading me. Daniel appeared beside her moments later, looking exhausted beneath his polite smile. "Elise," he said warmly, "I'm glad you came." Unlike Vanessa, Daniel at least sounded sincere, though lately I had started wondering whether sincerity mattered when it never translated into action. Vanessa lightly touched my arm. "Okay, there are reporters here tonight, so let's just keep things positive and simple, all right? Positive and simple." Another carefully polished phrase meaning, "Please don't embarrass me." I smiled faintly. "You don't have to worry about me, Vanessa." But she did worry. I could see it constantly now. Every glance, every interruption, every nervous adjustment in her voice whenever I spoke too long to someone important. As the evening continued, I wandered slowly through the ballroom while donors discussed investments and politicians practiced public charm. And everywhere I went, people looked at me strangely, not cruelly, curiously, as though they already recognized me from Vanessa's interviews. One woman near the champagne table smiled sympathetically and touched my arm. "You must be so proud of your daughter after everything your family went through." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" I asked quietly. "Oh." She hesitated awkwardly. "I read the article about your difficult years after your husband passed." Difficult years. Such a gentle phrase for public humiliation. I forced a smile. "Yes," I said softly. "There were difficult years." The woman nodded sympathetically before drifting away. I stood there frozen. And suddenly I realized something horrifying. Vanessa's story had spread farther than I thought. Much farther. Across the room I noticed Claire Monroe watching me quietly. Beside her stood Megan Foster. And near the stage, Arthur Bennett had just arrived. The sight of all three of them in the same room made my pulse quicken. Because for the first time, the people who knew the truth outnumbered the people protecting the lie. Vanessa noticed them too. I saw the exact moment panic entered her eyes. She walked quickly toward me, lowering her voice sharply. "What are they doing here?" I looked at her carefully. They were invited. You know what I mean? For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Vanessa forced another smile as a photographer passed nearby. "Mom," she whispered tightly, "please don't talk to them tonight." I stared at her in disbelief. "Why, you know why?" "No," I said quietly. "I don't think I do anymore." Her jaw tightened. "Because people misunderstand things." The audacity of that sentence nearly made me laugh. People misunderstand things. After years of lies, suddenly she cared about misunderstanding. Before I could answer, someone tapped a spoon lightly against a champagne glass near the stage. The ballroom slowly quieted. Vanessa immediately straightened her posture. "Showtime." A board member stepped onto the stage and smiled broadly. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we honor one of the most influential community voices in Columbus." Applause filled the room. Vanessa smiled beautifully beside me. "A woman whose personal story of resilience has inspired countless people." More applause. Then the speaker turned toward Vanessa warmly. "Vanessa Brooks." The ballroom erupted. And standing there in the middle of that applause, I suddenly realized something devastating. Every person in that room was celebrating a version of my daughter, built partly from my silence. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure I could stay silent much longer. The applause seemed endless. Vanessa stood near the stage, smiling gracefully, while cameras flashed across the ballroom. Her white gown shimmered beneath the lights, and for a moment she looked exactly like the woman from magazine covers and newspaper interviews. Perfect, untouchable, admired. And standing beside the crowd, holding my old brown purse against my chest, I suddenly felt invisible. Not because people ignored me, because they thought they already knew who I was. The troubled mother, the unstable widow, the burden Vanessa heroically overcame. The board member on stage continued praising her. "Vanessa Brooks has shown this city what resilience truly looks like. Her work with vulnerable families and young women has inspired us all." More applause. I glanced toward Arthur Bennett across the ballroom. His expression was grave. Near him, Claire Monroe stood perfectly still, watching Vanessa with unreadable eyes. Megan Foster looked uncomfortable, almost anxious. They all knew, and somehow that made the room feel smaller, warmer, dangerous. Vanessa stepped onto the stage and accepted the award gracefully, while cameras captured every angle of her smile. "Thank you," she began warmly. "This city has given me opportunities I never imagined growing up." Her voice was smooth, emotional in all the right places, carefully practiced. "I learned early in life that hardship can either break you or shape you into someone stronger." People nodded sympathetically. Some even looked emotional. I felt sick because she was using my pain again, turning it into inspiration, transforming sacrifice into marketing. Vanessa continued speaking beautifully about perseverance, difficult childhood experiences, and overcoming instability at home. Every sentence sounded just vague enough to avoid direct lies, and just specific enough to destroy me anyway. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "Some people in our lives teach us who we should never become." Soft murmurs moved through the audience. My chest tightened sharply. I suddenly realized she wasn't simply protecting her image anymore. She was publicly burying me alive. And worse than that, she knew I was standing in the room hearing every word. When Vanessa finished speaking, the ballroom erupted into applause once more. She smiled modestly, placing one hand over her heart while cameras flashed. Then her eyes found me, only for a second. But I saw something there. Not guilt, relief. relief that she had successfully controlled the narrative again. As she stepped off the stage, several guests surrounded her immediately with praise and congratulations. I tried quietly moving toward the back of the ballroom. I needed air, space, somewhere to breathe before my chest burst open completely. But I never made it to the exit. Mrs. Warren. I turned slowly. A young female reporter stood beside me holding a phone and notepad. Sophia Reed, the journalist who wrote Vanessa's original article. She smiled politely. I'm Sophia. We spoke briefly once on the phone. I remembered now. Months earlier, she had called asking vague questions about Vanessa's childhood. Vanessa told me not to participate because the article needed clear emotional focus. At the time, I believed her. Now I understood she simply didn't want the truth complicating her story. Sophia tilted her head kindly. Your daughter speaks very lovingly about how difficult those years were for both of you. My throat tightened. I suppose. You must be proud of her. The word proud almost broke me, because despite everything, part of me still was. That's what made the betrayal so unbearable. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could speak, Vanessa appeared beside us instantly. Mom, she interrupted, brightly sliding an arm around my shoulders. There you are? Her grip tightened slightly, too tightly, possessively. Sophia smiled. Your speech was beautiful. Thank you, Vanessa said gracefully. It means a lot. Then she turned toward me with that polished smile still frozen on her face. Mom gets overwhelmed at large events, she explained casually to Sophia. Overwhelmed. The same careful language again. Always shaping perception, always reducing me into someone fragile and unstable. Sophia nodded sympathetically. I understand. Vanessa's hand remained firmly on my shoulder as she guided me away from the reporter. The moment we reached a quieter corner near the hallway, her smile vanished completely. What are you doing? She whispered sharply. I stared at her. Talking. You know exactly what I mean. No, I said quietly. I don't anymore. Her eyes darted across the room nervously. Mom, you look upset. I am upset. Then please try not to show it publicly. Publicly. Everything with her came back to appearances. I looked at her carefully. Do you hear yourself when you talk to me? Vanessa exhaled impatiently. Please don't start tonight. Start what a scene. I actually laughed softly at that. Because after years of humiliation, even basic honesty now counted as causing trouble. I haven't done anything, I whispered. But you're acting emotional. There it was again. Emotional. Difficult. Unstable. Years of carefully chosen words designed to make my pain sound irrational. Something inside me hardened. Not loudly, quietly, like ice forming. You told people I caused financial problems? I said calmly. Vanessa immediately looked around again. Lower your voice. Did you? You're oversimplifying things. Did you tell them I was unstable? Her jaw tightened. Mom, did you? She stared at me silently for several seconds before answering in a cold whisper. You don't understand how public storytelling works. The sentence stunned me. Not because it denied anything. Because it confirmed everything. You used me, I whispered. I survived difficult circumstances. You created them. No, she snapped quietly. You're making this bigger than it is. Bigger than it is. I thought about the strangers pitying me, the church members whispering, the women at the cafe discussing my supposed instability, years of lies, and somehow she still thought I was exaggerating. Vanessa rubbed her forehead anxiously. Mom, please. Important people are here tonight. I looked around the ballroom slowly, at the politicians, the donors, the cameras, the smiling strangers applauding a lie. Then I looked back at my daughter. You care more about these people than the truth? That's not fair. No, I said softly. What's unfair is spending years protecting someone who keeps humiliating you. Her face changed instantly then. The softness disappeared completely. All that remained was frustration. You know what, she hissed quietly. This is exactly why I tried keeping you away from these events. The words landed like a slap. I stared at her in disbelief. What, you don't know how to behave in rooms like this? My chest tightened painfully. Vanessa continued, her voice low and sharp. You make everything uncomfortable. You always look upset. You say emotionally loaded things at the worst possible moments. Emotionally loaded things. As though honesty itself embarrassed her. I whispered, I'm your mother. And right now, she snapped, you're ruining my reputation. The sentence cut through me so deeply that for a moment, the entire ballroom seemed to disappear. Everything went silent inside my head. The music, the conversations, the laughter, gone. Just her words echoing over and over again. You're ruining my reputation. I looked at my daughter standing beneath golden lights in her expensive gown. And suddenly, after years of silence, something inside me finally broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, calmly. I straightened my shoulders slowly. Then I looked directly into her eyes and asked in a quiet voice, if my existence embarrasses you that much? Vanessa's expression shifted immediately. Fear. Real fear. Should I tell them what you did to me? The color drained from her face instantly. Elise, she whispered. Not Mom. Elise. For the first time since she was a little girl, around us nearby conversations started slowing as people noticed the tension. Vanessa grabbed my arm tightly. Don't do this. But I no longer recognized the woman standing in front of me as the frightened daughter I once sacrificed everything to protect. All I saw now was someone willing to destroy me publicly to save herself privately. And for the first time in over a decade, I wasn't sure I wanted to protect her anymore. Vanessa's fingers tightened painfully around my arm. Mom, she whispered through clenched teeth. Please smile. Smile. Even now, with panic spreading across her face, she still cared about appearances first. Around us, conversations had quieted noticeably. Guests nearby pretended not to stare, but I could feel attention shifting toward us like heat. People sense tension the same way animals sense storms. Vanessa forced another polished smile for the crowd, while keeping her voice low and sharp. You're upset. Let's talk privately. I looked directly into her eyes. No. Fear flickered across her expression again. Not sadness, not guilt. Fear, because for the first time in years, she no longer controlled me completely. Please, she hissed softly. Not here. And suddenly, I understood something clearly. Vanessa wasn't afraid of the truth itself. She was afraid of witnesses. I gently pulled my arm free from her grip. You asked me not to embarrass you, I said calmly. So maybe we should stop pretending. The sentence landed louder than I intended. Several people nearby went completely silent. I noticed Sophia Reed standing only a few feet away now, pretending to check something on her phone while obviously listening. Daniel approached quickly from across the ballroom, concern written across his face. What's going on? Vanessa immediately turned toward him. Nothing, she said too fast. But Daniel looked at me carefully, and for the first time all evening, I think he realized something was genuinely wrong. Elise? He asked softly. I looked at him. Did you know? Vanessa's face went pale instantly. Mom? But I kept my eyes on Daniel. Did you know what Vanessa told people about me? Confusion crossed his expression. She told people you struggled after Richard passed, he answered carefully. No, I said quietly. She told people I destroyed our family financially. Daniel looked stunned. What? Vanessa stepped forward immediately. She's twisting things because she's emotional right now. Emotional? The word hit me differently now. Not painful anymore. Predictable. I turned slowly toward the growing crowd around us. People were openly watching now. Donors, politicians, reporters, board members. All the important people Vanessa cared about impressing. For years I feared humiliating my daughter publicly. But standing there beneath those ballroom lights, I suddenly realized something devastating. She had never shown me the same mercy. She says, I'm emotional, I said quietly to the room around us. But I think most mothers would be emotional after sacrificing their lives for someone who publicly rewrites them into a burden. Elise Daniel said carefully, maybe this isn't the place? No, I interrupted softly. This is exactly the place. Vanessa's breathing became visibly uneven. Mom, stop. But I couldn't stop anymore. Not after years of silence. Not after years of humiliation disguised as public inspiration. I reached into my purse slowly. The movement alone made Vanessa panic. Oh my God, she whispered. Inside my purse was the folded copy of Vanessa's handwritten confession Arthur had insisted I keep with me after our conversation. Not because he wanted revenge, because he no longer trusted Vanessa to protect either of us. I spent 10 years protecting my daughter, I said calmly while unfolding the paper carefully. 10 years letting people believe I was unstable, irresponsible, difficult. The room had become completely silent now. Even the music seemed quieter somehow. Vanessa stepped closer desperately. Mom, please don't. But her voice no longer sounded powerful. It sounded frightened. I looked directly at Sophia Reed. You wrote an article about my daughter surviving a destructive home, I said softly. Sophia looked deeply uncomfortable now. Yes. She never told you she stole nearly $40,000 from a community foundation when she was 26. A sharp gasp moved through the crowd. Vanessa looked like someone had physically struck her. That's not, she never told you. I continued calmly that I sold my retirement property to repay the money quietly before criminal charges were filed. Daniel stared at Vanessa in complete shock. What is she talking about? Vanessa turned toward him wildly. She's confused. No, another voice interrupted firmly. Claire Monroe stepped forward through the crowd, and suddenly, every remaining trace of color disappeared from Vanessa's face. Claire stood beside me calmly. She isn't confused. The ballroom erupted into whispers instantly. No, Vanessa whispered. Claire looked toward the crowd with composed professionalism. I was the executive director of the foundation involved, she explained evenly. And Elise Warren is telling the truth. Daniel stepped backward slowly, as though the floor beneath him had shifted. What? Vanessa grabbed his arm. She hated me from the beginning. Vanessa Claire interrupted sharply. Stop. The authority in her voice silenced the room again. I stood there trembling slightly, not from fear anymore, but from emotional exhaustion. Years of buried pain felt like they were finally rising out of me all at once. I begged her not to report my daughter, I said quietly. I told her Vanessa made a mistake. I promised the money would be repaid. I looked down at the confession letter in my hands, and it was. Sophia Reed slowly lowered her phone. Wait, she whispered. Are you saying the financial instability Vanessa described in the article was mine? I answered softly. Because I destroyed my future, saving hers. Silence. heavy, unavoidable silence. Several people looked toward Vanessa now, with expressions shifting rapidly from admiration into confusion. And for the first time in years, the room saw me clearly. Not as a dramatic widow, not as an unstable mother, as a woman who sacrificed everything quietly while someone else turned that sacrifice into personal branding. Vanessa suddenly stepped forward, tears filling her eyes instantly. "You don't understand," she cried. "I was young. I made mistakes." I looked at her sadly. "Yes," I whispered. "You did, and you promised me this would stay private." The words escaped her before she could stop them. The crowd reacted immediately, because suddenly, without realizing it, Vanessa had confirmed everything herself. Daniel stared at her in horror. "You told me your mother caused the financial issues." Vanessa turned toward him desperately. "I was trying to protect my career." "At her expense?" he asked quietly. Vanessa's breathing became shaky. "You don't understand how hard I worked to build this life." I almost broke hearing that sentence, because deep down, I knew she believed it completely. She truly thought protecting her image justified destroying me. "I never wanted your life destroyed," I whispered. "Not then. Not now." "Then why are you doing this?" The pain in her voice finally sounded real, and somehow that hurt worst of all. "Because you left me alone, carrying your shame while you turned me into your excuse." Tears slid down Vanessa's face, now ruining the perfect makeup she spent hours applying. But even then, even standing in front of undeniable truth, she still looked more terrified about losing status than losing me. Arthur Bennett finally stepped forward, quietly holding a folder. I believe he said calmly, "It's time people understood Elise Warren legally accepted public blame in exchange for protecting her daughter from prosecution." Another wave of whispers spread through the ballroom. Vanessa covered her mouth with shaking hands. And for the first time all evening, nobody looked at her like an inspiration anymore. They looked at her like a stranger. The ballroom no longer sounded elegant. It sounded chaotic. Whispers spread across the room like wildfire while guests leaned toward each other exchanging stunned expressions. Some people pulled out phones immediately. Others stared openly at Vanessa as though they were trying to reconcile the woman they admired with the truth now unraveling in front of them. Vanessa stood frozen near the center of it all, breathing hard, mascara beginning to streak beneath her eyes. For the first time in years, she looked exactly like the frightened young woman who once showed up crying on my porch after midnight. But this time, I couldn't rush forward and save her. Because I finally understood something painful. Every time I saved Vanessa from consequences, I helped create the person standing before me now. Daniel slowly stepped away from her. Not dramatically, quietly, like a man realizing the ground beneath his marriage wasn't solid anymore. "You lied to me," he said softly. Vanessa turned toward him desperately. "I was protecting us." "No," he replied, voice tight with disbelief. "You blamed your mother for something you did." People nearby fell even quieter listening to them. Vanessa looked around wildly now, like someone searching for an escape route that no longer existed. "You don't understand how complicated it was," she whispered. Arthur Bennett stepped closer calmly. "It was actually very simple," he said. "Elise protected you?" "Repeatedly." Vanessa glared at him through tears. "You had no right to bring those documents here." Arthur's expression hardened slightly. "And you had no right to spend years destroying your mother's reputation to protect your own." That sentence landed heavily across the room. Because suddenly, everyone understood the real scandal wasn't only the money from years ago. It was what Vanessa did afterward. The lies, the manipulation, the way she turned sacrifice into shame. Sophia Reed finally spoke again, her journalist instincts clearly overtaking her discomfort. Vanessa, she asked carefully, did you knowingly allow false assumptions about your mother to spread publicly? Vanessa looked horrified. This is not an interview. But your public story directly involved her. I never named her. The room reacted immediately to that answer, because technically she was right. She never explicitly called me unstable. She only carefully implied it often enough that everyone reached the conclusion themselves, which somehow felt even crueler. Claire Monroe crossed her arms. You built an entire public identity around surviving a mother who quietly destroyed herself protecting you. Vanessa turned sharply toward her. You always hated me. No, Claire answered calmly. I pitied you. That seemed to hit Vanessa harder than anger would have. For a moment, she looked genuinely shattered. Then suddenly, her expression changed. I knew that look immediately. It was the same look she wore as a child whenever she got cornered. Calculation, defense, survival. Vanessa straightened slowly, wiping tears from beneath her eyes. You all want to judge me, she said shakily. Fine. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. Vanessa? No, she snapped. Nobody here understands what pressure feels like. The room went silent again. I was 26 years old, she continued emotionally. I was drowning financially. I was terrified of failing. I made one mistake. One mistake, Claire repeated sharply. Yes, one mistake, Vanessa cried. And I spent years trying to become better afterward. I watched her carefully, because parts of what she said were true. She had worked hard. She had built a successful career. She had helped charities and raised money and mentored young women. But the problem wasn't that she once made a terrible mistake. The problem was that she kept making new ones to protect the old one. Vanessa turned toward the crowd desperately now. Do you know what it's like growing up terrified of becoming ordinary? She asked. Do you know what it's like feeling like your entire future could disappear overnight? Several people looked uncomfortable now. Sympathetic even. Vanessa always knew how to redirect emotion. How dare you, Claire said quietly. But Vanessa kept going. My mother chose to help me. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was again. Choice, as though my sacrifice removed her responsibility. She insisted on protecting me, Vanessa continued. And I spent years trying to rebuild my life afterward. Daniel stared at her in disbelief, at the cost of hers. Vanessa looked at him sharply. You think you understand this situation because of one dramatic scene tonight? No, Daniel answered quietly. I think I understand it because your mother looks devastated while you still sound concerned about your image. That sentence silenced Vanessa completely for a moment, because deep down, she knew it was true. Sophia lowered her phone slowly. Why didn't you ever correct the public narrative about your mother? She asked softly. Vanessa hesitated, and in that hesitation, the truth became visible, because there was no good answer. Finally, she whispered, people connected with the story. The honesty of that answer stunned the room. Not because it was cruel, because it was real. Vanessa had discovered years ago that pain could become currency. And once public sympathy started rewarding her, she kept feeding the story. Even when it destroyed me. I looked at my daughter standing beneath golden ballroom lights while strangers watched her carefully. And suddenly, I didn't feel anger anymore. Only grief. Grief for the little girl who once cried over second-place trophies. Grief for the woman who became so addicted to admiration that she no longer recognized cruelty inside herself. Vanessa turned toward me then, and for the first time all evening, her voice sounded smaller. "You could have talked to me privately." The words nearly broke my heart. Because after everything, part of her still believed I betrayed her. I answered quietly. "I tried privately for years." Tears slid down her face again. "You humiliated me." I stared at her for several long seconds, then softly asked, "Do you know how many nights I sat alone while strangers pitied me because of your lies?" She looked away. "That article destroyed me in places you can't see." I continued. "At church, in my neighborhood, inside myself." Vanessa covered her mouth. People around us remained painfully silent now, not gossiping anymore, listening, actually listening. And maybe that hurt Vanessa most of all, because admiration had disappeared from the room. Now people were seeing her clearly, not as a survivor, as a woman who sacrificed her mother's dignity to maintain her own reputation. Daniel rubbed his face tiredly. "I defended you to people," he said quietly. "I thought your mother was emotionally unstable because you told me she was." Vanessa looked horrified. "I never said unstable. You didn't have to," he answered. Another painful silence followed. Then Sophia Reed spoke carefully. "Elise, why didn't you tell the truth sooner?" Everyone looked at me. I swallowed hard, because the answer was embarrassingly simple. Because she was my daughter. My voice cracked slightly. And mothers convince themselves love means protecting their children from consequences. Tears filled my eyes suddenly, but eventually I whispered, "You realize protecting someone from consequences can turn them into someone unrecognizable." Vanessa broke completely then, not dramatically, quietly. Her shoulders collapsed inward while tears ruined the careful makeup and polished image she spent years building. And for one heartbreaking moment, she didn't look powerful anymore. She looked lost. I left the ballroom 20 minutes later. Not because anyone asked me to leave, because I suddenly felt unbearably tired. The kind of tiredness that settles into your bones after carrying pain for too many years. As I walked toward the hotel exit, people moved out of my way quietly. Some looked ashamed, some sympathetic. A few even tried offering small smiles, as though kindness could undo humiliation already lived. It couldn't. Near the entrance, Sophia Reed caught up with me. "Elise," she called softly. I stopped. She looked nothing like the confident journalist from earlier. Now she seemed genuinely shaken. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. I stared at her for a moment before answering. "You believed the story you were given? That's not an excuse." "No, it wasn't." But strangely, I didn't feel angry at her. Sophia looked down briefly. "I should have spoken to you directly before publishing anything." I nodded once. "Yes, you should have." Her eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry." For a second, I saw something Vanessa had forgotten long ago. Accountability. Real accountability doesn't defend itself first. It listens. Sophia hesitated before asking carefully, "What happens now?" I looked through the glass hotel doors toward the dark Ohio streets outside. "I honestly don't know." That was the truth. People imagine exposing the truth feels victorious. It doesn't. It feels heavy, because even when lies collapse, relationships collapse with them. Outside, cold wind wrapped around me immediately. I stood near the curb, hugging my coat tighter, while city traffic moved through the night around me. A few minutes later, Arthur Bennett stepped outside beside me. "You shouldn't stand alone out here," he said gently. I almost smiled. I've been standing alone for years. Arthur's expression saddened. Yes, he admitted quietly. You have. A black SUV pulled away from the hotel entrance nearby, while reporters began gathering near the front doors. News spreads fast in wealthy circles, especially scandal. Arthur adjusted his coat. You did the right thing. I closed my eyes briefly. Did I? Yes. I just destroyed my daughter publicly. No, he corrected softly. She destroyed herself publicly. You simply stopped protecting the lie. The distinction mattered more than I expected. Because deep down, guilt had already started crawling through me. Not guilt for telling the truth. Guilt for finally choosing myself after so many years. That's the strange thing about women from my generation. We were taught sacrifice so deeply that self-protection feels selfish. Arthur placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Elise. There comes a point where silence becomes permission. I stared at the glowing hotel windows behind us. Inside those walls, Vanessa's carefully built image was collapsing piece by piece. And despite everything, part of me still wanted to go back inside and rescue her. I whispered. She looked terrified. Arthur sighed quietly. She should have been terrified years ago. A cab pulled up moments later. Arthur opened the door for me carefully. Call me tomorrow, he said. I nodded once before climbing inside. As the car pulled away from the hotel, I looked back one final time. Reporters were already gathering near the entrance, phones out, questions ready. The story had escaped now. There was no pulling it back. When I got home, the silence inside my little house felt enormous. I kicked off my shoes near the door and stood in the dark kitchen staring at nothing. Then slowly, I began crying. Not because I regretted telling the truth, because the truth cost so much. I cried for the daughter I used to know, for the young woman who once wrote me apology letters promising she would spend her life making things right. For myself, for the years I spent shrinking smaller so someone else could shine brighter. And most painfully of all, I cried because even after everything, I still loved her. The next morning, Columbus exploded. News websites picked up the gala confrontation almost immediately. Not full articles at first, just rumors, questions, anonymous sources. Then by noon, Sophia Reed released an official statement online. She admitted new information had surfaced regarding Vanessa's public narrative about her family history, and announced she was investigating further. That was all it took. The internet did the rest. By afternoon, Vanessa's social media pages were flooded with comments. Some angry, some shocked, some defending her desperately. But the admiration had cracked. And once public admiration cracks, people become vicious quickly. I avoided the internet as much as possible. Still, the outside world found me anyway. Around 2 o'clock, my neighbor Helen knocked gently on my front door holding a casserole dish. I figured you might not feel like cooking, she said softly. I almost broke down right there. Because Helen had lived next door for 8 years and never once treated me like a burden. Not after Richard died, not after the articles, not even now. Thank you, I whispered. She squeezed my hand gently. You deserved better than that. Those words stayed with me long after she left. You deserved better. I wasn't used to hearing that. For years I trained myself to believe suffering quietly was noble. That enduring humiliation proved love. But maybe love without respect eventually becomes self-destruction. Later that evening, my phone rang repeatedly. Unknown numbers, reporters, old acquaintances, even women from church who suddenly wanted to check on me. I ignored them all, except one. Daniel. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me not to. Hello. For several seconds, he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice sounded exhausted. I'm sorry. The simplicity of it stunned me. You don't owe me an apology, I answered softly. Yes, he said quietly. I do. I sat slowly at the kitchen table. I believed her. The pain in his voice sounded genuine. She told me your grief after Richard passed made things unstable financially. I thought she was protecting you emotionally by managing certain stories publicly. I closed my eyes. She's very convincing. Yes, he whispered sadly. She is. Silence settled between us. Then Daniel asked softly, why didn't you ever defend yourself? The question hurt more than he realized, because I had asked myself the same thing repeatedly since the gala. I thought protecting her made me a good mother, I admitted. And now, I stared out the kitchen window at the darkening sky. Now I think I confused love with disappearing. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said quietly, she's falling apart. My chest tightened instantly despite everything. What do you mean? She locked herself in the bedroom most of today. She keeps saying everyone hates her. Tears burned behind my eyes immediately, because underneath all the lies and ambition, she was still my daughter. And no mother stops hurting when her child hurts, even when the child caused the damage themselves. I never wanted this, I whispered. I know. She thinks I betrayed her. Daniel sighed softly. She doesn't understand yet that the betrayal started long before last night. After the call ended, I sat alone in silence again. And for the first time since the gala, I finally admitted something terrifying to myself. The truth had freed me. But it had also shattered whatever remained of my relationship with Vanessa. For the next 2 weeks, Vanessa disappeared from public view. No interviews, no charity events, no carefully edited photographs online. At first, people treated the scandal like entertainment. Columbus society thrived on polished gossip disguised as concern. Women who once praised Vanessa over wine now whispered about her over lunch instead. Did you hear she lied for years? I always thought something felt off. The poor mother. It amazed me how quickly public admiration could turn into public cruelty. But underneath the gossip, real consequences were unfolding. Vanessa lost 2 major consulting contracts within days of the gala. One nonprofit quietly removed her from their advisory board. Another organization announced they were reviewing leadership relationships moving forward. Translation. They no longer trusted her image. And in Vanessa's world, image was everything. Daniel called me occasionally during those weeks. Never to defend her, never to pressure me. Mostly because I think he was trying to understand how his marriage became something he no longer recognized. She barely leaves the bedroom, he admitted during one phone call. I sat in my kitchen, slowly peeling apples for a pie while listening. She's sleeping constantly, he continued quietly. Or staring at her phone reading comments. That won't help her. I know. I hesitated before asking softly, how are you? Daniel laughed bitterly. I honestly don't know anymore. I understood that feeling too well. When betrayal enters a family, it changes everyone inside it, not all at once. Slowly, like water damage spreading behind walls before anyone notices the structure weakening. Did she ever talk to you about why she did it? He asked carefully. I set the knife down. She was always afraid. Of what? Being ordinary. The silence on the line told me Daniel was finally starting to understand something important. Vanessa didn't lie because she enjoyed cruelty. She lied because admiration had become emotional survival. And once people build their identity around external approval, truth starts feeling dangerous. After we hung up, I stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window, while rain slid softly down the glass. Somewhere along the way, my daughter stopped wanting love. She started needing validation instead, and those two things are not the same. 3 days later, I received a text message from Vanessa. Just one sentence. "I don't know how to fix this." I stared at the screen for nearly 10 minutes. No manipulation, no defensiveness, no blame, just exhaustion. And somehow that frightened me more than her anger ever did. Because for the first time she sounded human again. I typed several responses before deleting them all. Finally, I wrote, "Neither do I." She didn't answer. That same evening, I drove to the grocery store just before sunset. I was standing in the cereal aisle comparing prices when I heard two women nearby talking quietly. One of them recognized me immediately. "Oh," she whispered awkwardly. I braced myself automatically for pity, or gossip, or curiosity. Instead, the older woman stepped closer gently. "I just wanted to say..." She hesitated. "You were very brave." The kindness in her voice nearly undid me. "Thank you," I whispered. She smiled sadly. Mothers protect their children for so long that sometimes they forget who's protecting them. I stood frozen after she walked away, because strangers understood my pain more clearly than my own daughter had for years. That realization hurt in ways I still couldn't fully explain. A week later, Daniel came to visit me unexpectedly. He looked exhausted, tie loosened, dark circles beneath his eyes. Older somehow. I invited him inside, and we sat at the kitchen table while coffee cooled untouched between us. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then finally, Daniel rubbed both hands over his face tiredly. I moved into the guest room. My chest tightened. "I'm sorry." He nodded weakly. "Me too." I studied him carefully. "You love her?" "Yes," he admitted immediately. "I do." The honesty in his voice made me unexpectedly emotional. Because despite everything, I loved her too. That was the tragedy inside all of this. Love survived longer than trust. Daniel looked around my kitchen quietly. "This house feels peaceful," he murmured. I almost laughed. For years, I thought my life looked small compared to Vanessa's glamorous world. Now I realized peace itself was a kind of wealth. "She keeps saying everyone sees her as a monster now," Daniel said softly. I stared down at my coffee cup. "That's not what I wanted." "I know. I never wanted revenge." Daniel nodded slowly. "I believe you." That mattered more than I expected. Because after the gala, part of me feared people would think I exposed Vanessa out of bitterness. But bitterness wasn't what pushed me to speak. Exhaustion did. Daniel leaned back heavily in his chair. "She reread your old letters yesterday." I looked up sharply. "What she found, the box you gave her after Richard died. The birthday cards, the notes, everything." My throat tightened immediately. For years, I wrote Vanessa letters anytime life overwhelmed her. Tiny reminders. "You're stronger than you think. I'm proud of you. You don't have to earn love." Simple things mothers say when they believe love can still protect their children from becoming hard. Daniel looked at me carefully. "She cried for hours." Tears burned behind my eyes instantly. Because no matter what happened between us, hearing my child was hurting still shattered me. She kept saying she doesn't understand when she became this person. I closed my eyes briefly, but deep down, I think I did understand. Not the exact moment, but the process. Small lies rewarded publicly. Image valued more than honesty. Success praised more than character. And underneath all of it, fear. Fear of failing. Fear of disappointing people. Fear of not mattering enough. I whispered I should have made her face consequences years ago. Daniel shook his head immediately. No, you loved her. Yes, I said softly. But sometimes love without boundaries becomes permission. The sentence sat heavily between us, because both of us knew it was true. Before leaving, Daniel stood awkwardly near the front door. She misses you, he said quietly. I almost broke then. Not because I doubted it, because missing someone and respecting them are not always the same thing. After he left, I sat alone in the living room while evening shadows stretched across the floor. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to remember Vanessa before ambition consumed her. 5 years old, dancing barefoot in the kitchen. 10 years old, crying when injured birds fell from trees. 16 years old, sleeping beside me after Richard's surgery because she was terrified of losing her father. She wasn't born cruel. That was important for me to remember. People become distorted slowly, one compromise at a time, one selfish decision at a time, one rewarded lie at a time. Late that night, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Vanessa. I'm sorry for what I said about you. I stared at the words for a long time. Then another message appeared. I think I became addicted to being admired, and for the first time since the gala, I cried for my daughter again instead of because of her. Vanessa asked to see me 3 days later. Not at her house, not at my house. At a diner halfway between us called Millie's. The place had been there for decades. Red vinyl booths, black and white tile floors, waitresses who still called everyone Han. Richard used to take me there after church on Sundays when Vanessa was little, back when our family still felt simple. I almost canceled twice before going. Part of me feared seeing her again would reopen every wound from the gala. Another part feared something worse, that I would look at my daughter and still want to protect her from consequences she needed to face. When I arrived, Vanessa was already there sitting in a corner booth near the window. And for the first time in years, she looked ordinary. No designer dress, no perfect makeup, no carefully styled hair, just jeans, a gray sweater, and tired eyes swollen from too many sleepless nights. She stood immediately when she saw me. Hi, Mom. The word sounded fragile now, not polished, not performative, real. I sat down slowly across from her. For several awkward seconds, neither of us spoke. A waitress came over and filled our coffee cups silently before disappearing again. Vanessa stared down into hers. I almost didn't come, she admitted quietly. I know the feeling. That nearly made her smile. Nearly. The silence stretched again. Then finally she whispered, I'm ashamed. The honesty in her voice hit me harder than anger ever could have, because I realized something important in that moment. Vanessa wasn't defending herself anymore. She was finally seeing herself clearly. I folded my hands together carefully. So am I. She looked up sharply. You, yes. Tears filled her eyes instantly. Why? Because I spent years helping you avoid becoming accountable. Her face crumpled slightly. No, Mom. I thought protecting you was love, I continued softly. But sometimes protection becomes enabling when it goes too far. Vanessa looked down immediately. I ruined everything. The sentence came out small, childlike. I studied her quietly across the table. No, I said gently. You damaged things. There's a difference. She laughed bitterly through tears. That sounds generous, considering what I did to you. I didn't answer right away, because the truth was complicated. What Vanessa did hurt me deeply, but pain and love can exist together inside families. That's what makes betrayal so confusing. Finally, I asked softly, "Why did you really do it?" Vanessa closed her eyes. Not the money from years ago. The lies afterward, the stories, the public humiliation. She rubbed trembling fingers against her coffee cup. At first, it was survival, she whispered. I stayed silent. When the foundation incident happened, I thought my life was over. I thought everyone would see me as a failure forever. You should have faced it. I know that now. Tears slipped down her face quietly. But then you saved me. The guilt in her voice sounded genuine now. And after that, she swallowed hard. I became obsessed with proving I deserved the second chance. I understood that part, but not the rest. So why turn me into the villain? Vanessa covered her eyes briefly. Because people love redemption stories. The honesty hurt. Vanessa, I know how terrible that sounds. Her voice cracked. But it's true. She lowered her hands slowly. When I first talked publicly about overcoming hardship, people responded to it. They admired me. Opportunities came faster. Donors trusted me more. Companies wanted me attached to their campaigns. I stared at her quietly, and eventually she whispered the story became more valuable than the truth. There it was. The real confession. Not greed, not cruelty, addiction to admiration. I kept telling myself I wasn't really hurting you, she continued shakily. Because I never said your name directly. I convinced myself people were just making assumptions. But you encouraged those assumptions. Yes. Her voice broke completely on the word. Yes, I did. I looked out the diner window toward the gray Ohio afternoon. For years I imagined this conversation differently, angrier, louder. But now that it was finally happening, all I felt was sadness. Vanessa wiped tears from her face helplessly. I became someone I don't even recognize anymore. I looked back at her. Yes, I said softly. You did. She nodded painfully. I know. The waitress brought our food quietly, sensing the heaviness at the table. Neither of us touched it immediately. Vanessa stared at her untouched fries before whispering, "Do you hate me?" The question shattered me. Because no matter how old your child becomes, hearing pain in their voice still reaches straight into your heart. No, I answered honestly. She started crying harder then. I don't deserve that. No, I agreed softly. You don't. Her face twisted with shame. But I still love you. The words seemed to physically break her. For several moments, she cried openly while people in nearby booths politely looked away. Finally, she whispered, I spent years trying to make strangers admire me while treating the one person who actually loved me like a liability. I felt tears filling my own eyes now. Why was I so embarrassing to you? Vanessa looked horrified immediately. You weren't. You said I ruined your reputation. She shook her head quickly. No, I said that because... She stopped. Because what her voice dropped into a whisper. Because every time you walked into those rooms, I remembered who I really was before the image. The answer stunned me into silence. Vanessa wiped her face again. You knew the truth about me? She continued shakily. And deep down, I think I resented you for it. That level of honesty hurt almost as much as the lies once had. But it also felt important, necessary. Because healing cannot happen around partial truths. I wanted people to see me as extraordinary, she whispered. And every time I looked at you, I remembered the scared 26-year-old who stole money and begged her mother to save her. I reached slowly for my coffee cup. And instead of facing your shame, I said quietly, You transferred it onto me. She nodded through tears. Yes. Silence settled between us again. Not hostile this time, just heavy with truth. Finally, Vanessa looked at me carefully. "Can you ever forgive me?" I thought about that question for a long time before answering. Forgiveness and trust are different things. Pain flickered across her face. "I know. I may forgive you," I continued softly. "But that doesn't mean we pretend this never happened." She nodded slowly. "I understand, and forgiveness doesn't erase truth." More tears slid down her cheeks. "I know. For the first time since the gala, I saw my daughter without the performance. No audience, no branding, no polished speeches. Just a deeply flawed woman sitting across from her mother, realizing admiration built on lies eventually collapses." Vanessa took a shaky breath. "I want to fix this." I looked at her carefully. "Then stop trying to fix your image first." She froze slightly. "Fix your character," I whispered. "The image will follow eventually." And sitting there inside that small diner, I realized something unexpected. The little girl I thought I lost forever wasn't completely gone. She was just buried beneath years of fear, ambition, and performance. 2 months after the gala, Vanessa held a press conference. Not at a luxury hotel, not beside donors or politicians. Just a simple room at a community center in Columbus, with folding chairs, fluorescent lights, and a small podium near the front wall. When she asked if I would attend, I told her no. This part was hers, not mine. For once, she needed to stand alone inside the truth she created. I watched the live stream from my living room while rain tapped softly against the windows. Vanessa looked different now. Still beautiful, but quieter somehow. Less polished, less certain. And maybe for the first time in years, more real. She stood behind the podium, wearing a dark blue blazer with almost no makeup. Her hands trembled slightly before she began speaking. "My name is Vanessa Brooks," she said softly, "and for years I allowed people to believe false things about my mother in order to protect my reputation and public image. No dramatic music, no carefully crafted emotional phrasing, just truth. Simple truth. I told myself I wasn't directly lying because I rarely used specific words," she continued. "But I encouraged assumptions that damaged someone who spent her life protecting me." I sat quietly on my couch, gripping a tissue in one hand. She sacrificed her financial stability, her reputation, and her peace to save me, after I made serious mistakes when I was younger. Vanessa paused shakily. And instead of honoring that sacrifice, I turned it into a narrative that benefited me professionally. The room behind the cameras remained completely silent. I became addicted to admiration, she admitted. I cared more about how people saw me than the truth about who I actually was. Tears filled her eyes then, but this time she didn't weaponize them. She simply let them exist. "I hurt my mother deeply," she whispered, "and no public apology can fully repair that." I cried quietly hearing those words, not because everything was magically fixed, because accountability finally sounded honest coming from her. Vanessa announced she would step away from public relations work indefinitely and begin volunteering privately with financial literacy programs for young adults. "No cameras," she said softly. "No branding, no interviews, just responsibility." When the live stream ended, I sat alone in silence for a long time. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Vanessa. I meant every word. I stared at the screen before replying. "I know." And for the first time in years, that felt true. Life didn't magically return to normal after that. Healing never works that way. Some relationships survive betrayal quickly. Others rebuild slowly, like burned houses repaired board by board. Vanessa and I became something fragile but honest. We spoke more carefully now, more truthfully, sometimes painfully. There were still moments when anger resurfaced unexpectedly. Certain memories still hurt. Certain silences still carried grief. But at least we were no longer pretending. And strangely enough, truth created more peace than performance ever did. Daniel and Vanessa eventually began marriage counseling. Last I heard, they were trying to rebuild things slowly too. Not perfectly, honestly. As for me, I started going back to church regularly again. The first Sunday felt terrifying. I worried people would stare or whisper or pity me. Some did, but something inside me had changed. I no longer felt ashamed walking into rooms exactly as I was. One morning after service, Helen squeezed my hand and smiled. "You seem lighter lately." I thought about that for a moment before answering. I think I finally stopped apologizing for surviving. And maybe that was the biggest change of all. For years, I believed love required self-erasure. That being a good mother meant enduring quietly while someone else rewrote your dignity. But love without truth eventually becomes unhealthy, and sacrifice without boundaries becomes permission. Some afternoons, Vanessa visits me now, not for appearances, not because people are watching, just because she wants to. We sit on the porch drinking iced tea while my garden slowly blooms again. Sometimes we talk about difficult things. Sometimes we don't. A few weeks ago, she helped me repaint the porch railing. Halfway through, she suddenly stopped brushing paint and looked at me quietly. "You know what scares me most?" she asked. "What, that you loved me even when I gave you every reason not to?" I smiled sadly. That's motherhood. Tears filled her eyes instantly, but this time she didn't hide them. And I didn't hide mine either. Because healing begins the moment people stop performing and start telling the truth. I used to think strength meant protecting everyone else, no matter the cost. Now I think real strength is knowing when protecting someone starts destroying you. And maybe that's the lesson I needed to learn before it was too late. Not every child grows into the person you hoped they would become. Not every sacrifice gets appreciated. Not every apology repairs the damage completely. But truth still matters. Self-respect still matters. And women, especially mothers, deserve to exist without shrinking themselves into silence for someone else's comfort. For years, I let my daughter convince the world I was the shame in her story. But the truth was, I was the reason she still had a story left to protect at all. And finally, understanding that changed something inside me forever. If there's one thing I hope people take from my story, it's this: love should never require you to disappear. Too many mothers spend their lives sacrificing quietly while convincing themselves pain is proof of devotion. We excuse disrespect because we fear losing our children. We tolerate humiliation because we think endurance makes us loving, but protecting someone from accountability can sometimes help destroy them. And protecting everyone else while abandoning yourself eventually leaves nothing inside you but exhaustion. Forgiveness is powerful, but forgiveness without truth is just silence wearing a kinder name. If someone in your life has made you feel small, ashamed, or invisible, please remember this: your kindness should never become permission for others to erase your dignity. Speak the truth, set boundaries, and never confuse being needed with being valued. If this story touched your heart in any way, please like and subscribe. And in the comments, tell me honestly, have you ever stayed silent too long to protect someone you loved? And if you're comfortable sharing, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I truly read every comment, and I'd love to hear your story too.